Hello, my name is Alexis. I work for ECCO, Essex County Community Organization, and today I'll be speaking on the matter of immigration and what we at ECCO are doing. But first, I'd like to introduce myself. I was born in Mexico in my grandparents' farm. It was in the Pacific Ocean, so it's like a city called Acapulco. It's a tourist city, if you've heard of it. And an hour south of Acapulco is a small town, rural town, and my grandparents were farm workers. I remember my grandpa, as soon as I was able to hold the machete in my hand, he would take me to the farm, and then he would grow corn and watermelons and cucumbers, and I remember sometimes having a slingshot and shooting chickens because my grandma had a chicken coop in the backyard. So I have those memories of Mexico. My grandmother cooking tortillas on what we call a comal. And it's flat pan on top of firewood, and you'd make the tortillas by hand from the ingredients that came from our farm. And when she was making tortillas, she would roll it up, the maize dough, the corn, into a ball. Into a ball, and then it would turn into a disc, and she would roll it, and then it would flatten, and then she would go like this. And so I was like 5 years old, and I would look up at her, and I'd ask for a little ball, and I would make my own mini tortillas. And so I just try to copy her, making my own mini tortillas, and she would let me put my mini tortillas on the comal along with her normal, or in my mind, big tortillas. So when I talk about immigration, to me it's very personal. As I still have those memories of my grandmother and how through economic circumstances my mom had to leave our farm, which to me was like a paradise. And we landed in California a year later. We were there for a year, and I was 6 years old. I was very young, and this was back in 2003 along there. My mom worked a minimum wage job. I think she was something had with mail. I don't really remember, but she was a single parent with me and my sibling, and it was really difficult for her during that time. She couldn't pay the rent, so she was evicted, and so we moved like in 1 year 3 times. That's what I remember. And there were dynamics with the people we were living in because we couldn't get our own place, so it had to be with someone else. And there was always some conflict. So we moved out of there. Eventually, we heard from my aunt who was in Minnesota at the time. We moved to Minnesota because my aunt had said there are better job opportunities, and there's a place where we could stay with her. Rent was cheaper. It was in a small town, hours south of the Twin Cities again. And I was raised there, essentially. I think, all of this in hindsight, you get to see what my mom went through. It was difficult for her because she still struggled to raise me and my sibling, and another one on the way through a boyfriend that didn't stick for too long. And so we moved again from apartment to apartment. And I had anger issues growing up just because I had something really good back in Mexico. for what I thought, And I miss my grandparents. Miss my grandma. And we had to live a life where it was a struggle here in the U.S. Because my mother thought that this country had a lot to offer. But it was difficult for her as I was growing up, and all the things that she never told us about. Looking back, I can now remember and look at it through a different lens. And she struggled a lot. And when I was in high school, my mother, she was working the night shift at a warehouse, and she got injured with her left leg. I was 16 at the time, and it was like a phone call. She told us, someone called from the job and told us that she was injured, and we didn't know what was happening. Well, it ended up being, for 6 months she was bedridden, and she was in her room, and she was depressed. She got depressed, as one would. And so I, to help out with the family, got a job at the warehouse, the same warehouse that had injured her. And I started working, like 2 months in. My coworkers, who were immigrants like me, who I had known in the community back in Minnesota, they wanted to compare checks after the night shift. So it was the morning in the parking lot, and we compared checks, and one of my coworkers noticed that they were being paid less, having been there for 3 years, than a white coworker who had been there for less time. So this was an equity issue, and also a dignity issue, where my coworkers did not have enough to pay the bills with the hard work that we were doing. It was labor that we were doing for $11 an hour. And so I was the only bilingual person there, and so I helped with interpretation and got to see through that experience how, instead of rolling with the punches, instead of taking all of the hurt and storing it inside, is using that energy to accomplish something together. And that experience of me and my coworkers, immigrant coworkers, fighting together for a little dignity. At the end, after like 3 months of talking between management and my coworkers and me interpreting, we got a $1 raise. And that was a big deal for us, right? $11 to $12, that's almost 10% raise to us. And this was without a union, just organic, happened organically. I haven't seen the world the same way again. The way I see the world is that we, in fact, can make a difference. And that leads me to the work that I'm doing right now with ECCO. I came here in June of last year as an immigrant organizer. I haven't done organizing since I was 16 years old. And the things that we did just last month, I'll repeat. We had a protest in Lynn. 250 people showed up outside of City Hall to show support for immigrant communities, the people that are being deported in our communities, in Lynn and Salem and throughout Massachusetts. We wanted to show support, and we did, publicly. There was presence of undercover cops at that protest, and the presence of a suspected neo-Nazi who was in that protest. This work takes courage, and this work is not easy to do. We started off also going deep into communities in the North Shore, as our work at ECCO is faith-based, 59 congregations throughout the North Shore, and it takes us all over the place. Just in Rockport, I think 2 weeks ago, we did a Know Your Rights. A week before that, we did a Know Your Rights with our Guatemalan immigrant community in Lynn, at another church as well. Just a week ago, our leaders, two directly impacted leaders, met with Elizabeth Warren to discuss immigration issues. And we've had countless meetings with other organizations. ECCO has begun coalition building, meaning that we are building, along with others, a coalition of members that, and our organizations throughout the state that did not exist before, but post-election we realized that there is a need for more participation, more involvement, and more intensity to this work than before. During the last administration. So we built something new. And it's a new emerging coalition of organizations, grassroots. And ECCO is a part of that. So for the month of February, we've done plenty of things. And we wish to carry that type of work moving forward. ECCO's history in immigration is also something to note. We have heavy organizing involvement and history in defending and preventing deportations. During the first Trump administration, clergy got together, members got together to prevent a couple of people from being deported successfully. The person, or one of our leaders who met with Elizabeth Warren a week ago, she was one of them. And they are still heavily involved in our work. Briefly mentioning her story is one of Blanca, a person that ECCO successfully prevented, who prevented their deportation, and it involved our clergy visiting the director of ICE, both to make sure that we were treating people humanely, and also that we prevented Blanca's deportation. And it also involved Blanca's own courage to step out into the light. As many of our people are going back into the shadows, we have leaders willing to step up into the light, even though there is risks that accompany it, such as targeting by ICE. And Blanca's story, she told me, I think that she lives in peace right now, even though she has an upcoming ICE appointment, in that this is not going to let her affect the way she wants to live. And those are strong words. I think I'm in agreement there. That instead of losing hope, of being disheartened by the way our world is, there is still something that we can do together, and that is the work at ECCO. I think that many of the things that immigrants carry are common values, and values that align with those of many congregations throughout the North Shore, and that those values are tied to family, tied to love for our neighbors, celebration of life. Yeah, and every time I do this, I think of my grandmother, I think of my mother and all she fought and all she did. And she has achieved the American dream, however rough and sometimes impossible to accomplish. She is now better, and her children have gotten a good education, and I'm glad to carry on this work that historically in the North Shore has been carried on by a diverse group of people as we center the voices of directly impacted voices and people. We also have a lot of white people who have been allies in this movement, who have spent their time, who have driven down all over the North Shore to do this work. And so this work, the way ECCO is doing it, welcomes all of y'all to be a part of this. As we move forward into more extremist, heavier territory, just like they have done it before, we also have done it before. And we'll do it again. Thank you.